room. We have people who have been working this issue for a long time, and I know you all know a lot. We've got Bill Speeden here, who is right there fighting the belly, the beast on this, and going back to the early '80s when it first came up. So we've got a lot of knowledge here in the room, and I would encourage you, if you're new to the issue, to reach out to a lot of the folks, not just myself and Mary, but to everyone that's here. Let me give you a little bit of background on the issue, and we'll get a sense. Are you all familiar with the ban generally? Who's aware that we have, for example, a ban on uranium mining in Virginia? Awesome. Well, that's a great place to start. So, going back to 1982, the General Assembly put into place a prohibition on mining uranium in Virginia. And that has remained on the books to this day. The issue really came back to a head here in 2007 when company Virginia Uranium Inc., with a mix of local investors and a lot of foreign investors, company Virginia Energy Resources, which is the parent company, is publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We're interested in mining deposit, beginning with a deposit that's in Pittsylvania County in Southside Virginia, Chatham, not too far from Danville. It's the Coles Hill deposit. But, and Mary will talk more about the specifics on this, the issue really is a statewide issue. It's not just this one deposit. There are threats that are in multiple other watersheds that's worth keeping in mind. When the issue came back up in 2007 and 2008, one of the fallouts of that, the industry tried to push a bill back then to lift the ban. I'm pleased to report that we defeated that bill back then. And we're going to need to do that again this session. But the fallout of what happened when we killed the bill to lift the ban last time was a study that came out, or that's being pushed from the Virginia Coal and Energy Commission to the National Academy of Sciences. There are several studies that are ongoing, but this is sort of one of the key ones to keep an eye on. The National Academy of Sciences agreed to study sort of uranium mining. They formed a committee on uranium mining in Virginia that's looking at the issue sort of broad scale. The report from the NAS, National Academy of Sciences, is due back imminently. I've heard some rumors it might drop on Monday. But what's critical to keep in mind, this is just sort of background on the issue, is that report is not the end point of the National Academy of Sciences process. It's a waypoint along the road. Our contract, the state's contract with the NAS, specifies, and I'll read straight from the contract, specifies, quote, a 5-month period after public release and delivery of the report, pre-publication form, which is what's going to happen this month, to allow for extensive public outreach that will include public meetings in Virginia to disseminate the report's findings. So it's a 5-month period going forward. In short, the NAS project isn't even done until April or May, which, as you know, 60-day session starts January 11th. Well, the General Assembly will have adjourned, hopefully, before this project is even done. So one point to just keep in mind is the General Assembly cannot renege on this promise that's in our contract that says we're going to allow the public the time to look at this study, to understand it, to talk to their legislators about it before we consider doing anything on it. That's what we agreed to, or that's what the state agreed to back in 2010 when they signed the contract. That's what they should stick to. All right, now, so that's the background. Now on to sort of the merits of the issue. First is just sort of to understand what is going on with what the company is trying to do, what uranium mining is all about in Virginia. Let me tell you what it's not about. It's not about providing fuel for Virginia's nuclear reactors. As you know, we've got 4 reactors here in Virginia, 2 at North Anna, 2 in Surrey County. This is not about providing fuel for those 4 reactors, because what you do is you take the rock, the ore has relatively very little uranium in it. In fact, the Coles Hill site, this Pennsylvania County site, according to the industry, has got 0.06% uranium. So the overwhelming majority of the rock is ore that you need to landfill somewhere. So what happens is they crush the rock, they pour it through sort of a chemical leachate process to try to get out the uranium. That uranium that they get out is what's called yellow cake. That yellow cake then has to get shipped somewhere else to an enrichment facility to where you can be processed and turned into nuclear fuel. The closest facility is an aging one right now that's in Paducah, Kentucky, but there are a couple others, Utah, Washington State. There are a few in the United States. But the large point there is other states get that yellow cake. That's what we give away. What we get to keep, this is our present for the project, what we get is all of that radioactive waste and tailings. And the tailings, that's sort of the industry word for the waste that's get left behind from the mining and milling process, retains 85% of its original radioactivity. So I don't know if you all were involved or remember the proposal a few years ago to barge trash into Virginia. And the pushback was, well, Virginia already is the second largest importer of out-of-state trash. We don't really want to be the dumping ground. That's exactly what this bill is about. It's making us the dumping ground for the radioactive waste and shipping the product elsewhere. The industry will also say, well, this is about energy independence and security and not importing our fuel from hostile nations. A key piece there to tell your legislators is, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, the nation that has the largest amount of reasonably assured uranium resources is Australia. Number 2 on the list is Canada. So not exactly our enemies. And in fact, there was a New York Times story just before Thanksgiving that quoted the fuel business consultant as saying that we've got 100 years of highly enriched uranium already in storage, and if you look at decommissioning old uranium weapons from the Cold War, there's enough for probably another 1,000 years of naval fuel for whatever we would need. So the short version is we don't need to be importing from hostile nations. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? How are you going to wait?
We can take them as we go. That probably goes.
You mentioned the percentage of content in the ore in Virginia.
Yeah.
How does that compare with other deposits throughout the nation? I mean, its level of quality, or is it really a financial gain to?
It's an interesting question on sort of where the break-even point is on this process. When they initially wanted to come back to do it, the price of uranium was skyrocketing fast. This was 2007, during the height of the past bubble. The idea of $100 uranium seemed like it was going to be imminent and permanent. After Fukushima, well, even after the first bubble crash, the price went down to about $70 a pound. After Fukushima, it went down to about $50 a pound, where it's roughly stayed. It's at $51.50 right now. Last I
looked. What was the percentage you mentioned of content?
Oh, right. But so what are other deposits? So the question, so first is this question of where the break-even point is for the Virginia deposits. That's unclear. But if you look at the world's richest deposit, the world's richest deposits are actually in northern Saskatchewan in Canada. The McLean Lake mine is 15% ore. 15. So in other words, it is more than 250 times richer than the Virginia deposit. Now, an important piece for that is, that means that mining our site means creating a lot more waste for each pound of yellow cake that you produce. So we've got a technically much more difficult problem because we have so much more waste than they would have, relative to the amount of ore that you're, yellow cake that you're producing. All right, so what are the sure, we'll take one more question.
One thing you didn't bring out is that the NAS study doesn't even address whether the mining is safe. What they were asked to do by Virginia Tech, who's the one running it, is wasn't even to say whether mining was safe or not safe. So it's really not going to answer the question that we really would want to know, and that's sort of what the legislators have been hiding behind.
Right, I mean, I think that's a fair point, a good point, that there has been this misperception about this National Academy of Sciences study. I read an op-ed by Walter Cole Sr., who's the president of the mining company down in Chatham, and he said, you know, if the NAS tells us that it can't be done safely, then we won't do it. Well, he knows full well that that's not a question the NAS is being asked to consider. And in fairness to the NAS, this sort of, they see that very much as a policy question. And that's sort of outside their bailiwick as scientists. Their role is, we're going to evaluate the issues. We're essentially going to provide a data dump to Virginia on all the issues that are relevant to the deciding whether or not to mine uranium. The NAS will inform the debate, but they will not resolve the debate for us. So that's an important piece of information. And that's also why you need a lot of time to digest that study, because it's not like you can pick it up, read the executive summary, and say, oh, there's the answer. It's, you know, Robert Bodner, who's a Virginia Tech professor, who's been affiliated with the mining company on this, was very candid at a Garden Club of Virginia event. I don't know how many of y'all were at that Garden Club event. But he was asked, well, how long does it typically take to understand these NAS studies? And he said, well, you know, some of them are very complex. And he wasn't talking about the uranium in particular, but he said, you know, generally, you know, they can take years to digest and really understand. But yet the General Assembly is being asked to review it over their Christmas holiday and come back and be ready to vote on it. Let me give you a sense of what some of the risks are that we're acutely facing that you can talk about with your legislators. Obviously, the key is water quality. There's been mining out west, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico. The result of that has been just a long and really a tragic legacy of environmental contamination. More than $2 billion in remediation costs to address that, and the problem is still not resolved. Just to give you one example, and there are countless examples like this. There was a mill owned by the Cotter Corporation in, I believe it was Canyon City, Utah. In the early 80s, they discovered that the liner holding all the radioactive waste had torn and was leaking contaminated, polluted water, leachate into the groundwater. So the site was declared a Superfund site, which, you know, you think, okay, fine, we're going to put some resources to it, take care of the problem. Well, despite being declared a Superfund site in the early 80s, in 2004, a new government report looks at it and finds that it's still leaking millions of gallons of leachate into the groundwater every year. And this is the sort of icing on the cake. You would think that would be a wake-up call, but no, this closed mill that's been a Superfund site that's still a failing, disastrous problem. The reason it's in the news recently is because the industry now wants to come back and reopen the mine and make the problem even worse. You know, Colorado's not the only place with these problems. Canada, which VUI, Virginia Uranium Inc. has pointed to, has had its share of problems. In 1989, there was a 500,000 gallon leak in one mine, another 500,000 gallon leak in 93. Go ahead.
These sort of groundwater contamination incidents that you're talking about, have they been conclusively linked to an increase in health problems in communities affected by these?
There has been some study on it. There's a guy out of Tufts University, Douglas Brugge, who's B-R-U-G-G-E, who's done some studies on it. And he has found, and this is, by the way, I should have mentioned this at the outset, we've got a little question and answer fact sheet that has almost all this information in it. There's some of them at the back here, there's some at the sign-in table, some in the other room. So make sure you grab, you know, this before you leave. Sally? I don't know if we've uploaded them. I just picked them up from the printer yesterday.
That would be great.
But we can. Yeah, we'll figure a way to upload it. Make sure we get it online. But Brugge's research is highlighted. You know, there have been studies that show higher rates of childhood leukemia, respiratory disease, kidney disease for populations living near mine sites. There's been studies on, there was one New Mexico study, this is really important for agricultural interests and the Farm Bureau interests. The New Mexico study found elevated levels of uranium in the cattle that were grazing in areas near uranium mines. Southside obviously has a significant agricultural economy that would be threatened if this project goes forward. So Canada has had horrible problems with spills. One big thing that you might hear is, well, haven't we mined this in the eastern half of the United States? And the answer is no. And Robert Bodnergan, the Virginia Tech professor, has been candid about this. We've never had an open pit or underground uranium mine east of the Mississippi in an area prone to serious hurricanes and extreme weather events. Go ahead.
The Farm Bureau has come out and raising a red flag about this, I understand, from the agricultural.
Right, and Bill Speeden was there at their convention this week, and maybe you can talk more about it. I talked to their lobbyist about it on Thursday to try to get it into this fact sheet, and he said that the Farm Bureau has taken a position of supporting the ban until the studies, like the NAS study, have been thoroughly evaluated.
Yeah.
So it's maybe not the strong position as we would hope for, but it's absolutely on our side at this point in the fight, which is great.
It's just watered down to the point where they're just focusing on the agricultural aspects. They don't, the Farm Bureau doesn't want to be associated with eco-terrorists like we have.
So, right, but what's important about that point, and Mary, I think will talk more about this, is that this isn't just, a traditional environmental issue. There are a lot of not usual suspects that have been coming to the table on this one. Let me go back to this Florida example, or rather the east of the Mississippi example. So one of the big issues here is you look at mining in Colorado, where again it's been a disaster, and they haven't had the wet weather problems that we have. They don't get the hurricanes that we get in Virginia. Just to give you one example of why that's important, one way they deal with the waste out in the Southwest is they build these big ponds to evaporate the waste, and then they take the dried residue, compact it, and landfill that. Well, you obviously cannot do an evaporation pond in Virginia when you get major wet weather storms, one after another after another. It just won't work. We actually took a look at, from the data from NOAA, from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and Virginia from 1910 to the present has been impacted by 78 hurricanes. It is not a rare event. It is definitely something that we need to deal with. Bill?
Yeah, I think an important point here for people to understand is out west we have 12, 15 inches of rain a year. Semi-arid, you have 40, 50 inches of evaporation rate a year, only 15 inches of rain.
Right.
So you have a positive evaporation rate. Here we have a negative evaporation rate. We have 42 to 45 inches of rain, only 15 to 16 inches of evaporation rate. So Tennant's ponds are guaranteed to overflow.
Right, and in fact, that's exactly what's happened. I don't know if y'all heard that we've got we get more rainfall than we do evaporation. Out in the Southwest, it's the reverse. It's, arid area where there's more evaporation than rainfall. The industry has said, oh, of course there's been mining east of the Mississippi. There's been mining in Florida. Well, in Florida, what they've done is they've had phosphate mining, and there's uranium with the phosphate, and they have extracted uranium as a byproduct of the phosphate mine. So it's a different process. But even so, it is not an encouraging example. Read one report that documented that Florida is still dealing with an industry that has left behind 1 billion tons of radioactive waste in these phosphogypsum stacks, which are the stacks that store the radioactive waste left over from the mining process. And what's happened is exactly like what Bill talks about. You get a major event happen when Hurricane Francis hit Florida, and what happens is those stacks overflow, and they're required to actually go to the state regulators, and they get approval to release some essentially untreated or minimally treated wastewater in order to prevent complete and total failure. Go ahead.
if uranium is natural in the soil, when does it become dangerous? It's already there anyway. So what happens, it makes it to where it's a hazard?
Well, there are a couple things. One, uranium that's bound up in ore underground at 0.06 of 1% is in a far more stable situation than uranium that's been pulled out. And the leachate, which contains a lot of chemicals, a lot of radioactive waste, and then you're trying to manage that, which is a much less stable compound. Bill, did you want to?
Yeah, I try and answer that question this way. If you have a cup of hot water and you put a coffee bean in it, you have a cup of hot water with a coffee bean in it. But if you take that coffee bean and grind it up, then you have a cup of coffee. That's the difference between what is safe uranium and what is dangerous uranium.
That's a great analogy. I'm going to steal that.
Ain't it like asbestos though, as long as you don't tamper with it, it's really kind of not gonna bother anything as long as it's left alone. I mean, that's what asbestos is, as long as you don't tamper with it, it's kind of, it's there, but it's not really harmful. When you start scraping on it and getting the dust out, then it becomes harmful.
Yeah, and anyone who's got an old house that has asbestos tiles knows that very well. Back there?
I thought radon was a product of uranium, and as it changes in the ground and radon comes up, and that causes lots of health problems too. And that's
No,
why
absolutely, you're right. There are certainly, and I don't know if it's a one-to-one link. In other words, a site that has a lot of radon problems may be a site that has a lot of uranium underground, but it may not be a perfect correlation. But it is an issue that is dealt with in the mining, that as you start mining this, one of the byproducts is an immense amount of radon gas that gets produced in the mine site, and obviously a horrible health hazard for the workers.
Cale, it's also,
We'll go up front first, and then we'll go to the back.
I think that people should understand that it isn't the uranium necessarily that's the worst offender. Uranium has about 20 radioactive nuclides that are in its decay chain. Those are usually, as long as uranium's been around for a million years or so, there's about the same amounts of all these other substances, radium, polonium, thorium, and all these other compounds that are radioactively active, and some of them are worse or dangerous than uranium.
Which is exactly why the reports say that the tailings retain 85% of the radioactivity. It's the radium, and it's the thorium, and other compounds. And so that's really the most dangerous piece about this proposal is the milling process. You take the ore out of the ground, that's one thing, but then once you start crushing it and pouring a chemical process through it to leach the uranium out, and then you have to manage all that waste, that's when you really get into a serious problem. Let me move on. I've talked a little bit about some of the differences in Virginia. I should mention, I said I was only going to focus on the National Academy of Sciences study. There's one other study I should mention, which is the City of Virginia Beach. Now, the City of Virginia Beach did a study because the Coles Hill property is upstream on the Roanoke River from Lake Gaston. Lake Gaston, by a pipeline, provides public water for Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, and about and a lot of other communities. So they hired the Michael Baker Corporation, which is a global engineering firm, to study it. And what the Baker report came out to show was that if there's a major sort of worst case scenario, a massive spill, that leaking of a containment cell with all this waste gets into the Roanoke River, the river and reservoir system could have levels of radioactivity 10 to 20 times greater than what would be allowed under the Safe Water Drinking Act. And that it could take as long as 2 years to flush Lake Gaston and flush that system. So the risks here are profound. One other piece you'll hear about this is, well, this is about jobs, this is about economic development, this is a net benefit to the community. And what's key to remember there is you've got to factor in the risks and the costs of those risks. The Colorado example that I mentioned, according to the Denver Post research on it, the cleanup costs for any one site are $50 million to $500 million, just for one site. In Florida, there was a company that owned one of these uranium phosphate sites. The company went bankrupt, left the state to clean up the site. That cleanup cost $144 million for that one site. Now, the state thought they were prepared for that. They had set aside a special reclamation fund to cover those costs. But the reclamation fund was capped at $80 million. So they quickly ran out of that. Florida Department of Environmental Protection had to go to their state General Assembly to say, we need, and they asked for $12 million a year to finish the cleanup out of the general fund budget. So that's money that otherwise would be going to education or going to transportation, and instead is getting told to pay for an industry mess that the industry just was allowed to walk away from by going bankrupt. Another issue that will come up on this is the question of Hampton Roads. In addition to the water quality issue, you all probably are aware we have a significant military presence in Hampton Roads. That's a huge economic driver for the state. According to the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the Navy contributes $13.5 billion every year to the Hampton Roads economy. I mean, that is just, it's hard to imagine Hampton Roads without that kind of investment. All of those facilities, the military bases in Hampton Roads, rely on public water supplies that are downstream from Coles Hill. So if you've got a catastrophic event like that modeled by the city of Virginia Beach, you're putting a risk to the military personnel and the families that are in that region. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Joe Bouchard, who used to be in the Virginia House of Delegates. Before that, he was a captain in the United States Navy and the former commander of the Norfolk Naval Station. He was at the Garden Club event, and he said, and this is a direct quote from Captain Bouchard, "National security risks are profound with this project and cannot be ignored." So that's the short version of it. I'm going to turn it back over to Mary here. That gives you a sense of the public health risks, the economic risks, and the timing for all the studies that are ongoing. There are other issues that you need to think about, which is the statewide impact and what you can do and what localities can do. And Mary's the best person to talk about that. So let me turn it over to Mary, and she can manage
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you, Cale. And I think the most important reason why we wanted to get this into all of your hands, I know many of you have sat through maybe once or twice my presentation on uranium mining and the real risks that we face. But this is really for you to use when speaking with your legislators. So when your legislator says, well, the industry says this, you say, well, let me give you the answer. So we've done all the work that we can do. I know Cale and myself and JR and Jeff and Lisa have been running around the state putting lots of miles on our cars, talking to as many legislators and the public as we can, and these are the most common questions that we get. So, while we aren't able to do as comprehensive of a presentation for you all today to walk through all the risks that we face, what we really wanted to give to you today are the answers to many of the questions that are out there on this issue. But stepping back, this is a really nasty process that's going to create millions of tons of radioactive waste left in our watershed, putting our public drinking water at risk. And yes, it's very much detrimental to our health, leading to everything from higher rates of cancer, kidney failure, and frankly, women have problems with stillborn births as well. So I'm going to answer questions after this because I only have a couple of minutes to get through this. But really, what are the statewide impacts? And I'm going to talk about this in two different degrees. So the first one, which is where Cale was just leading off, is that this is a real risk to our public drinking water sources. So obviously folks in Southside are really concerned about their groundwater, which is definitely going to be impacted, but then also what the downstream impacts are. So if a major hurricane or a major flooding incident happens, I mean, this is within the first proposed site, within a FEMA designated flood zone, so there's no question about whether this site will flood, it's when will it flood and how bad will the flooding be. So if this area floods and it's overwhelmed, this waste is going to go downstream. Now the first proposed site sits right along the Bannister River. I've taken a drive around there. You can see the Bannister River comes right up along the site. The Bannister River is connected to Carr Reservoir, or Kerr, depending on which side. Well, it depends on which side of the lake you're on. Goes right into a dam right there. That goes right into Lake Gaston. Lake Gaston provides drinking water for 1.2 million people in the cities of Virginia Beach and Chesapeake. Now there's obviously a 60-mile pipeline. If you took a look at the map, right? So they can turn that off, but then where are they going to get their water? That's a huge economic impact to the state of Virginia. So I don't care where you live, the city of Virginia Beach and the city of Chesapeake is going to be looking towards the state for some sort of funding to get some water for them. So that's the first part, right? So it doesn't matter whether you live in Southside or whether you live in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, these areas are all impacted. That's up to 2 million people. Well, then you have to think about, well, where else is there uranium in the state? Well, we know because Marline, which was the company back in the 1970s and 80s, came in and took out thousands of leases all over the state, that uranium isn't just in Southside Virginia. It's actually throughout the entire state. So their leases stretch from Southside Virginia in the Pennsylvania County region all the way north into North Piedmont area. So Fauquier, Madison, Culpeper, Orange County. Bill Speeden actually sits on one of the largest uranium deposits in Virginia. The industry came to him and asked him to lease his land, and thankfully, Bill did a lot of his own independent research to realize that this wasn't a legacy he wanted to leave for Virginia, and so he's been working hand in hand with us to make sure that uranium mining doesn't happen here. The reason I bring this up is because the uranium industry is smart. When they approach the General Assembly this year, they're most likely going to put together a clever piece of legislation that makes it seem as though uranium is only going to be mined in Southside Virginia. And Walter Coles, the CEO of Virginia Uranium Inc., maybe he truly believes that the only place he wants to mine is in Southside Virginia. Maybe that is what he truly believes. But if it happens in Southside Virginia, there are too many forces, there are too many multinational corporations that are looking to get their hands on this stuff, and they will come into Virginia and they will ensure that uranium is mined in more places than just one. So even if a bill passes this year that says it's just for Southside Virginia, let me be very honest with you, we'll be back here in a couple of years having a conversation about how do we keep it out of Northern Virginia. So if you live in other parts of the state, this is going to impact you. So the deposits in Northern Virginia that I was talking about in the Northern Piedmont region, those impact drinking water for Fredericksburg City, along the Rappahannock River, the Rapidan, as well as all of Fairfax County. So there's leases that sit along the Occoquan River, which impacts the drinking water for 1 million people more in Fairfax County. So first of all, the threat of uranium mining and the threat to our drinking water, this is statewide. But there's a second reason why this is a statewide issue. And this is incredibly important and the reason why we have all of you in the room today. Because this decision is not going to be made by the people who this will impact first. We as statewide organizations, Sierra Club's a statewide organization, Southern Environmental Law Center, League of Conservation Voters, there are a lot of times when we pick issues. I, coming out of college, said, I'm going to get our country off of oil. That was my big issue, and all I wanted to do was find an organization that was going to let me do it. Working for the Sierra Club, I got a call about a year ago from a woman named Naomi Hodge-Muse. And she called me up and she said, Mary, I live in Martinsville, Virginia. I just found out that they're trying to mine for uranium about 15 miles away from my house. I'm really upset about it, and I want you to come down here and teach me how to organize against it. I didn't really know that much about uranium mining, but I packed up my car and I went down. It was a cold night, and I talked to her about writing letters and the importance of that. And a couple of days later, I got a call from somebody in Floyd, Virginia, who said, "Hey, I heard you just went to Martinsville to talk to some folks about uranium mining. Can you come here?" As I started to learn more about it, I realized that there was this whole movement that had been going on for over 30 years that Bill was a part of and many other people were a part of people in Danville, people in Pennsylvania County. The reason why I tell this story is because people in Southside Virginia don't want uranium mining in Southside Virginia. They don't want it. They asked us to get involved because they know that we have access to all of you who are around the state who are going to provide the power that they need to stop uranium mining in their community. Southside legislators who represent the area, the delegates and the state senators, they support the current ban on uranium mining. However, even if every single one of them stood up on the rooftop and voted to keep the ban on uranium mining, guess what? They don't have enough votes. They need votes from Northern Virginia. They need votes from the Tidewater region. They need votes from Central Virginia. They need your legislators to vote to keep the ban. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that legislators from Northern Virginia are trying to pass the buck. they're talking to their lobbyist friends, because there's a lot of them, and they're saying, well, you know, you nudge me here, you nudge me there. Basically, we're just going to keep it in Southside Virginia, so that's not our problem. We don't want to tell them what to do. The system is broken, and we need Northern Virginia legislators, Central Virginia legislators, and Virginia legislators all across the state to stand up for the people of Southside Virginia, and again, for the people of Virginia. So that's why this is so important, and that's why it's a statewide issue. You know, Deborah Lovelace is one of the volunteers that we work with. She puts all of her time into this. She's the president of League of Individuals for the Environment, which is they are the belly of the beast. They're based in Pennsylvania County, and literally it's a group of volunteers that have poured their life into this for the past 30 years to try and protect their area for their kids. And she always looks at me every time I'm down there, and she's like, gosh, Mary, if we can just get Northern Virginia involved, I know we'll win. If you can just, I know you have members up there, if you can please just talk to your members, because if they stand up for this, I know we'll win. But we just got to get them engaged. So Deborah couldn't be here with us today because there's a pretty big meeting down in Southside Virginia on Tuesday, a big Coal and Energy Commission meeting, and she's basically calling every single pastor in Pennsylvania County that she can to try and get folks to turn out. But that's my plea from Deborah Lovelace, to say we need you all to talk to your legislators. So we've provided you with the talking points. We've got a bunch of information. But at the end of the day, this is pretty simple, right? This is nasty, toxic stuff. It's going to cost our state a ton of money, and the people of Southside Virginia don't want it. It's actually, I get a lot of calls from the media that say, well, I mean, don't they want the jobs? Naomi is so angry when people ask her that. I mean, give me a break, right? A job is not a job. We need real, good quality, well-paying jobs that are going to rebuild Virginia, that's going to rebuild Southside, and that's going to make Virginia the #1 state in the country. And that's exactly what we need all of you to help us do. So there's a couple of things that you can do. We're going to spend the afternoon talking about the importance of talking to your legislators and the importance of getting involved during the General Assembly session. But the first thing you can do is when you get home, make sure that you write a letter, make a phone call, and set up a meeting with your state legislator. This is a really good key piece of information that you can use, but there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that you can use. Keep the message simple, that's what's really important. Also, if you haven't, I know most of you have been in my presentations before, but if you haven't signed a postcard, sign a postcard because they're important. We have a goal of collecting 10,000 of these all around the state. It really does make a difference. And yeah, I'll take a quick question.
I was just asking, someone who has called my legislator and was told he was too busy to meet with me, and that I could see one of his aides. What is the value of meeting with the aides, you think? I mean, is it worth taking the time?
It's valuable. I mean, one of the things I love and hate about Virginia politics is that, you know, it is a part-time legislature, so these folks are working full-time jobs, most of them, on top of also being a legislator, and they have to take, you know, 3 months out of their work schedules to do it. It's important to meet with the aides because they actually, a lot of times, are the ones that are seeing all this stuff come through, and many of them have very close relationships with the legislator and talk to them one-on-one about what they're hearing from constituents. Definitely, you know, obviously, it's great if you can get in front of the legislator, but if you can't, the one thing I will say on that, and we're going to cover this afternoon, is it's tough. I mean, I've been spending the last couple of weeks trying to get in front of legislators one more time before the General Assembly session. December and January is really tough. Their schedules fill up quick. So the best time to meet with them, and I know we've already passed those times, but it's really March, April, May, June, July, August, when they have a little bit more time. Definitely try. If the next best thing is get in front of an aide, it absolutely does make a difference, and I would do it.
Could I address that real quick? Could I address that?
Mhm.
I'd just say, we got the same story. I'm Sam Ward with Virginia New Majority. Last year, I was with Reform Integration for America, and we got the same story from our representative. And the lady was almost a little rude on the phone, but we went in there with our facts. We sat down, she said she could give us 15 minutes. Her assistant came and knocked on the door with the, "Don't forget your meeting," and she said, "That's okay." She met with us for an hour and a half because we had all of our information, we had the facts, and she took all the notes and all of our handouts, and she went back to our representative. So if you really have it together, I think maybe what she did was kind of challenge us just to see if we could shut down. But don't let it stop you.
Yeah. Virginia?
Nobody, as far as I know yet today, has raised the issue of insurance coverage for radioactive disasters.
I mean, I just very briefly on that point, and I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but the industry has talked about bonding for this in the neighborhood of $20 million or $40 million. As you know, that's not even going to be close to covering it. One spill in Colorado was $500 million, and that's not even. And that's just the reclamation of the site. That's not talking about the long-term economic and public health damage, the increase in cancer rates. You're not bonding for that. So it's hard to quantify. But on the $20 million point, I talked to Bob Burnley, who's been working as a consultant for us. Bob is former director of the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality under Mark Warner, and he was saying, $20 million at a Superfund site, that doesn't even get you starting to clean up. That gets you an analysis of the problem and a plan for what you're going to do, but you actually haven't done anything yet. And that's $20 million into it.
I need a clarification. When you talk about bonding, does that mean the state itself bonds?
No, bonding is, in its traditional mining industry, is the applicant, as part of their proposal, agrees to put forward a bond to cover the future reclamation of the site. Not in case of a spill, but assuming everything goes smoothly and there's no problems, when it's time to shut the site down, they have a bond that would cover it. That way, if the company goes bankrupt or disappears, there's a bond to do the closing. And this is, I've talked to colleagues with other organizations out west, the bonds are always not even close to covering the reality of the problem, or a tiny fraction of a percentage of what's needed.
Just got one quick, aren't you a lawyer?
Yes.
What are the odds of Virginia being sued by North Carolina if the radiation or the tailings end up in North Carolina? Now that we have a positive, the governor's got this a positive checkbook. And North Carolina very well could sit there and go, now. What are the odds of that?
There have definitely been folks, and there are organizations like Roanoke River Basin Association that have been trying to really get North Carolina communities involved. In terms of what the legal hooks are, I'm not, it's hard to sort of say. They obviously don't have a direct role in our General Assembly process, but actually the folks, Roanoke River Basin Association, has gotten involved. Actually, a former colleague of mine at SELC, who's now with Duke University Law School, and their environmental law clinic at Duke is looking into that exact issue.
Can one state sue another state for damages?
In the Supreme Court, you can, but yeah, the short answer is yes, but whether this issue creates an issue is hard to say.
But the thing to know is that they are paying very close attention to this issue, and lots of localities are paying very close attention to this issue.
I'm from Virginia Beach, and I live in Richmond now, but I know Virginia Beach was in the courts for 10 or 15 years with North Carolina just to get the water from the gas.
It's a very contentious waterway,
so
absolutely.
I would imagine it could go the other way around, like you say.
All right, 10 minutes. I know there's lots of questions. Let's just say we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, back of the room, you can start.
Thank you, I'm Shane. One of the issues that came out at the Garden Club Forum was the issue of regulation solving the problem. Virginia Uranium claimed whatever regulations Virginia writes, we can comply with them. So I'd like y'all to comment on the difficulty of regulations, particularly in our state, as well as the agreement, non-agreement state.
And could you comment on Virginia being an agreement state?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, and Mary can chime in. The way, before we get to the agreement state, non-agreement state status, which deals with uranium mining law, not to get down that rabbit hole, but the key, the industry folks, Walt Coles Jr. was at a Wall Street presentation in March, and he said, we're going to have a bill that's going to, in January, it's going to direct the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to develop regulations. DMME, Department of Mines, Minerals and Energy, their budget is less than 1/10 of 1% of the state's total general fund and non-general fund combined budget. If you add in Department of Environmental Quality, which handles major clean water, clean air act laws, you get up to about 1/2 of 1% of the state's total budget. The short version, and Bob Burnley, former DEQ director, said this, the takeaway from that is environmental protection is not a high priority for Virginia's budget writers. So that's the reality of it. On the agreement state, non-agreement state status, given our short time, maybe that's something we can talk more about. The short version is there's federal law to regulate the milling process, not the mining. The mining is 100% state. The milling side is federal law, but states, as they can with many other programs, can apply to be an agreement state where the state takes over that program instead of the feds. Virginia is a partial agreement state right now. You were anxious on a question, so let's go for that.
Wait, I thought we were going in order here.
Well,
we had 2 and 3.
Well, we'll work quickly to get them all. Let's just start here.
Recently there was an article in the Dan, about, it was a councilman who went to Canada and he came back and wrote an article saying that the people there were okay drinking water when there was radiation and I mentioned when I read it. Is there any safe level of people just saying, well, there's radiation in my water, it's okay?
Well, there are Safe Water Drinking Act standards for the amount of level. So yes, according to the EPA, there are standards. The result is, an important thing to keep in mind in Canada is those mine sites, which are mostly in northern Saskatchewan, is way removed from population centers. The closest major city to those mines is Saskatoon. That global city is about 430 miles from the mine sites.
What's the population?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think I was there in Saskatoon for a meeting, and it felt about the size of Charlottesville, maybe a little smaller. There was a university there. Maybe that's why it felt like Charlottesville. But in any event, and there's not much. There's not even a paved road that gets you all the way up to where these mines are. The only way to visit them is to private charter a plane to fly in there. Just to give you a sense of how different it is here in Virginia, Coles Hill, 430 miles from Coles Hill, you can be in New York City, you can be in Charlotte, North Carolina, you can be in Knoxville, Tennessee. There are a lot of major population centers well within that 430-mile radius. I'll hand it back over to Mary.
Joe and then Peter.
He was number 2.
Okay, or Peter and then Joe.
One point I want to bring up, the People Environmental Council did a wind study, and all the winds that blow from Coles Hill blow in an arc from northern Virginia to Tidewater. And when you talk to your legislators, that's something you need to tell them about. And you were talking about the tailings pile. The tailings is, you have the radon. Radon has a half-life is 3.5 days, I believe. And it's the daughter of radon are what kill you. If you ingest radon, when it breaks down, is what's going to cause all your health problems. So these are the things you want to talk to these people about.
Yeah, both air quality and water quality are real concerns.
That's a big thing. And a lot of people that went to Canada were people that the uranium company handpicked.
Yes, these trips were paid for by the industry, and the industry lined up who they talked to. So it's a very one-sided, not exactly a balanced viewpoint. Joe?
Yeah, one encouraging thing is I was just down at City Council chambers with Norfolk yesterday, and their legislative priority is they want to be sure that this uranium mining business is safe and won't affect drinking water, because our drinking water also would be affected in Norfolk. Yes. So they've raised a flag there. So that's one good thing. They're saying, hold off here, let's be sure this is going to be safe. The second thing is, when people go to lobby, be sure and take a letter with you explaining what your points are, and leave it so that they have to answer and put you something in writing instead of just leaving a handout. Something coming back to the individual, I think, is helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about lobbying this afternoon. The one thing I just want to touch on really quickly on that is that, we talked about the lobbyists, we talked about the amount of money that's going in on this. There are many localities across the state that have come out supporting the current ban on uranium mining. Actually, one of the biggest problems that they're facing, particularly in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, is that because the uranium industry has hired so many lobbyists, places are finding a conflict of interest because their lobbyists who have lobbied for them for many years are now under contract to lobby for the uranium mining industry. And so the uranium industry has basically taken all of the major lobby firms in Richmond and at the same time given money to a lot of lobby firms not to take a position on this issue. So it's great that these localities are coming out and actually it's really showing a major conflict of interest in the state in terms of what localities want and what money can buy you in Richmond.